Thanks for tuning into the Replatform podcast, sponsored by Hypersonics and Attract, and hosted by me, James Gadd, and Paul Rogers. Warm welcome. It's your first episode. We've put a lot of time and effort to bring in all this amazing content and guests to you for free. Help us keep it that way. You can do that by referring us to other people in your network, get the word out there, share our posts on LinkedIn and Twitter. That'd be amazing. And the biggest thing you can do to help is rate the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you're listening. It really helps boost the visibility. So thanks. We hope you enjoy our episode. So let me just set it up before I introduce our guest. We're talking about an implementer's view on Shopify components, front end options, and checkout. It can be an interesting one because Shopify recently-ish announced components and microservices, and I guess part of their extended play towards appealing to enterprise businesses. But there's also a lot of stuff. I mean, Shopify is just constantly pushing out new releases and lots of functional changes. And there's a big new move towards a new checkout. So we already get under the hood of people who understand and know, because they are building sites using Shopify and understand the practicalities of launching. So a warm welcome to Max Rowland, who's the VP of Engineering at a leading global Shopify agency, Helix. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here. And I'm excited to dive into the world of components with you.
Yeah, amazing. And we know that you're flying off halfway around the world, and therefore we're going to make this as painless as we possibly can be. So appreciate you taking the time to join us before you run away to the airport.
Of course, no worries. I'm about to jump onto a 21-hour journey to Australia to go to a wedding and see my family and all that. So it's exciting. It's an exciting time.
Right, perfect way to get ready for the flight. So I'll ask the first question, and just to dive straight into things. So as James said, Shopify Components was announced a good couple of months ago now, 2-3 months ago. What's your view on it? Is it more of a market move against some of the kind of key competition, or do you see it as a new direction for the product?
Yeah, I don't see it as a superficial move. I see it as quite an intelligent move to, target larger merchants that understand that doing a full replatform at the same time provides an inherent and a high risk for their company. And it allows for a company to understand the landscape of Shopify, which often is, quite different to the landscapes of other competitor e-commerce platforms, to put their feet in, understand the APIs, the infrastructure, the nomenclature, through a progressive adoption. And so I see it as like an isolation of components gradually, which, I think has been a longer journey for Shopify, coupled with different pricing models, and also, coupled with implementers like Helix that are able to understand what it's like to be able to balance, multiple components that need to communicate, speak together, and achieve, a more singular aim. So I'm excited for the space. It's not going to be completely new for integrators, but it provides a new opportunity to be able to reach a greater degree of merchants that have been interested in Shopify for a long time, have complex infrastructure right now, and would like to, progressively replace certain parts of it, potentially through a multi-phase full adoption of Shopify.
That makes sense. I was at an event last week, and the new chief revenue officer from Shopify was there. I don't know if you've come across him, but one thing that was very clear was that they are targeting the enterprise, and they're definitely like shifting to kind of build around the needs of merchants in that space. And I think that was particularly interesting for me to see. Next question. So in terms of Helix and kind of how you operate, so you've already done quite a lot of work with headless builds, I believe, and your team are pretty experienced in that area. How do you see things changing with you being able to use Shopify in a microservices kind of approach? Do you see it making a big difference? Do you see it kind of meeting different needs for your merchants?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does change our relationship somewhat, but I don't think it's a fundamental change in the way that we approach projects. I see, our discovery phase of projects being really, really important, because we're not thinking about migrating from one idea of data right over to another idea of data or integrations or APIs. We're thinking about the way that different services or different isolated nodes need to communicate in harmony, share data, understand sources of truth. And I think, thinking about data contracts, thinking about, navigating different responsibilities between teams of enterprise companies is going to become more and more important. So, when we think about, components in relation to, say, the release of Online Store 2.0, I don't see it as being a huge change to the way, from technical standpoint, that we approach projects. I see us as having, big conversations with new merchants, but I don't see it as a drastic change in the iteration of what we do. Now, I will say that we have already done what we, this kind of componentized approach with Shopify before. We've had, companies that, I want to just, adopt Shopify's checkout while still, servicing a lot of their site through a completely different system. For example, like just a CMS Gatsby style on certain URL segments, whereas others have a relationship with checkout in a completely different and kind of isolated way. And we've also seen it the other way, where we've had an entire company, kind of front end presentational experience be on Shopify, but they have moved, to a part of their commerce experience to a checkout experience that they will have more ownership over. So I see us as having similar conversations with large brands with nuanced offerings. And I see us as maturing those and being able to have more opportunities to really explore these types of stacks. But it's more exciting than, I'd say, intimidating for an integrator.
Attract, your complete product discovery growth engine. Create relevant shopping experiences that convert into sales and grow online revenue with personalized search, merchandising, and recommendation solutions powered by AI. Find out more at attract.com.
I'm interested. So, like, a related question for me is one of the advantages that the likes of the modern SaaSes, Shopify's, or BigCommerce have against some of the more legacy, or everyone loves to use the word monolith, but let's use it. Platforms like Adobe Commerce's, Salesforce is that build project costs tend to be quite significantly lower. What I'd love to know is, because you said that your project approach won't fundamentally change, and the disciplines are kind of the same, but do you foresee that because of, if people are moving towards like a component-based microservices solution, should they be expecting higher build costs because of the extra development effort to go down this route, or are you not seeing that as being an issue?
It depends. I think that there is potentially an argument for going into an iterative approach, like a bit more of an agile billing model, because where there's a lot of learning that's happening as we progressively adopt on an existing infrastructure. I can see potentially like the conversation around timelines changing. It's not just going to be potentially like one launch, but it will be like a multi-phased launch throughout kind of longer duration. So, we might, when we think about fixed bid projects, over, say, like, I don't know, anywhere between like a 9 month to a 9 month timeline, like that kind of style of project, it might change, and it might move into this kind of progressive and longer term relationship with a trusted integrator, which, would mean that companies need to speak that agile language in a bit more mature way.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see, because my gut feel is that the merchants will need, or more merchants will need, to have internal project management resource to support through it, because there becomes more project management discipline, and that's not a bad thing, because actually it helps to manage and to deliver efficiency. But my gut feel is that we'll see more businesses taking that level of resource seriously, not just relying on their implementer partner or agency partner. I don't know whether you think that is likely to happen, or are you already seeing that more and more people are investing in project management skills themselves?
Yeah, I think that you're completely right. Like we have a lot of our clients have a project manager on their side, which has a direct relationship with the kind of lead project manager on our side, to be able to coordinate the different stakeholders that need to come in that might have different concerns. So as the brands get larger and more folks need to be brought in and brought out, depending on where we're at with the project, having a central person to be able to navigate that, understand timeline, particularly be able to maybe understand different work streams across different implementers or an internal team and our Felix or whoever the integrator with, it's going to become more and more important. You might see timelines that like are just not one, even within the same phase. It might not just be one key deliverable, but it might be a back-end team, POS team, a front-end team, a marketing team, or, a different teams managing different integrations that really need to be speaking in the same language to be able to get into an end-to-end testing cycle right before release.
Yeah, that makes sense. I interestingly had an off-the-record conversation with a D2C brand who they're on an old legacy platform and they are going to move, but they've got another 2 years before they can because of contractual commitments, cost, and they're going to move to a new platform. Can't disclose which one it is. Might be one we're talking on in this episode. Who knows? But they're going down the headless route, and they're tackling the front end bit first. So coming back to your point about multiple phases, they're actually going to get the front end stack sorted first. They've got a middleware in place, and then they're going to replace the commerce engine as like where that might end up in phase 3 or 4, to be honest, by the time. So it's really interesting to hear you saying the same thing, because see that more and more that people are buying into the fact that it doesn't have to be everything at once.
Yeah, it doesn't. And I think, one of the things that may be taken for granted, when we had thinking about multi-phases and longer timelines is, the amount of information that is downloaded, acquired, and has to be passed out. People leave, people come, even internally at companies. And so say like one of the key things here is we're going through this multi-phase approach is really articulate documentation that provides a really good track record and the ease of onboarding for new folks that need a lot of context download to be able to participate in the same dialogue. We're seeing it more and more as well. And it's interesting and exciting for us. But what you just communicated about, doing more of that CMS approach, knowing that commerce is coming later, understanding, the big picture, how commerce could be intertwined with other content. Maybe you want to make that content shoppable down the line. And there's some architectural considerations that we can take now so that we're not taking 5 steps back in the future. These are important conversations to have, and it's kind of like finding that balance, long-term vision, short-term vision.
Yeah, I completely agree. And even to the point where if you're planning to expand your storefronts, you could potentially launch on a new e-commerce platform with that additional storefront and then migrate existing later on. It's going to be fun conversations over the next few years, people. But let's move on. A question around hydrogen and oxygen. So hydrogen, for those listening here, I haven't heard of it, the headless framework, I think it's built on Remix, so it's JS, and then Oxygen, which is their hosting platform. Love to know, like, how much work are you doing with those two, and what do you think are the right use cases? Like, what type of project and what type of business do they suit?
Totally. But yeah, our team was at the Remix conference last week, and I will say that, the future of this stack is looking really bright and promising. It's iterating quickly, and the process of bringing in Remix to be the backbone of hydrogen is super exciting. But you're right, like hydrogen is kind of our building framework for headless sites with Shopify, and Oxygen is a first-party hosting solution that might be akin to, say, your Vercels and your Netlifys. So, I will say first off that we've seen the journey firsthand of hydrogen iterating over the last couple of years. We built the first hydrogen site, for Shopify with Shopify, which was Shopify.supply. And it was kind of the framework within its, I'd say, like mature infancy. And from there, it's kind of integrated over time, in both the hydrogen and oxygen space. For our Felix, we have been, our headless stack has also evolved over a number of years. We started off being a bit of a view shop, and then we've transitioned to a React shop. Part of it is to align with the trajectory of Shopify so that we're all speaking the same language. Part of it is because we really love where the React landscape is going. We've been, using Next.js for a long time and having it hosted on Netlify or Vercel. We've got a number of projects on hydrogen that are currently at play. So we're kind of, as an agency, evolving away from, the maturity of Next and onto the maturity of hydrogen at this point. And we think it's a great time in this landscape to really see hydrogen as the go-to headless solution for your Shopify headless builds. It's important to understand the limitations of the components, understand, the history of it so that you're making intelligent decisions as a front-end architect. But we're getting a level of maturity that is kind of a milestone, I think, for this landscape. So for us at Harfelix, we see hydrogen as the go-to solution at this point, rather than pushing into kind of more of that Next.js landscape that we have done in the past. We see the benefits as, there are TCO benefits in adopting Oxygen, which is you don't need to pay for another hosting provider. There's also simplicity in having one monolith do different things. So like Shopify take on the burden of hosting rather than bringing in a third party. And we also see like time to live. If you understand the design and feature system of hydrogen being a big benefit, you can get a headless site live faster. And I'd argue with a little less risk because you're writing less custom lines of code.
Hypersonics helps e-commerce companies make more profit every day. This AI-driven platform delivers recommendations for pricing and inventory that lead to bigger profits. Visit hypersonics.ai/podcast to get a free trial.
That makes sense. And I guess the next question, so obviously there's pros to hydrogen, oxygen, around, like you say, time to market, cost, and then I guess the other one will be eventually the ecosystem kind of adapting to that stack, hopefully. But like kind of going back to what we were saying earlier around kind of decoupling parts of the stack to essentially give more freedom, and if you wanted to potentially swap Shopify out, you could. Do you still think that there's an argument for an independent front end stack that essentially gives you that bit more freedom?
Yeah. It's important to say that like, because you go hydrogen doesn't mean that you can't iteratively adopt hydrogen. Like think about it as like, instead of writing a custom product card, you build out a product card that uses a hydrogen component to a greater degree. So, I think if you say, if you are focusing on agnostic decisions that allow for easy transitions between different nodes over time as something evolves, and it's where we're seeing and where we're hopeful that we're going with Remix and kind of bringing agnostic JS frameworks into the hydrogen landscape is that you can bring in hydrogen to I'd say de-risk your Shopify front end, but down the line, if you need to progressively roll over to to a different node, or to bring in Shopify later down the line, really is a matter of picking the components and bringing in those components of those systems and kind of like those atoms later in, so long as we kind of understand the framework of what Remix and what, the dependencies of those are, which are, think about server-side components, think about client-side components, think about, Oxygen hosting, which has this kind of like isomorphic landscape between, cached front-end presentational layer, but also the ability to run server-side code in a slightly, contained node thread. There's things that you can and cannot do. And if you understand that landscape earlier on, it might make progressive adoption a little easier down the line.
That makes sense. And I guess one other question, just sticking on the kind of component side or this side of things for a second. One of the unknowns is pricing, or one of the kind of public unknowns is pricing. Do you have a view on how this is likely to be priced based on essentially using different services?
Yeah. So I will say, that Shopify has not released any pricing officially. So what we're kind of this is the landscape of hearsay. But what I imagine is that components will be priced a la carte, and we'll see this be, find a balance between this landscape of components and the landscape of the Shopify Plus offering. So what I imagine this will go is that you can bring in a component into your stack without having to think about it as bringing in that full plus pricing structure, as maybe a way to go full plus later, or maybe a way just to use the components for the indefinite future. So I see there as likely being a balance between the two, so that one isn't cannibalized over the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. Always interesting to hear how people think that will work. And then going back to kind of, I guess, the core Shopify Plus kind of capabilities, what's available to merchants in that kind of enterprise segment or more complex segment now. I guess, where do you see the biggest gaps and the biggest problems that are still there for merchants moving over to Shopify?
Yeah, certainly. So, a big conversation as we get higher into the large merchant landscape is around internationalization and some of the nuance of being able to really have an articulate and unlimiting, a global strategy and be able to contain that in an e-commerce card or e-commerce system that makes sense. So, what we're seeing, over the last 12 months is a move away from the idea of Shopify's expansion stores to globally scale a brand, and see a lot of that functionality come into the landscape of Shopify markets. And this is a place of high iteration and a place that's got what it seems to be a pretty clean and exciting roadmap that's coming up in the future. So, we are in a lot of our sales cycles and a lot of our strategic cycles, discovery cycles, understanding how we do personalization, how we do language internationalization, how we handle global subsidiaries and bind them to markets, how we understand how to do legitimate order routing when you've got 3PLs that are all around the world. These are areas where Shopify is understanding that these were barriers and coming up with functionality now, or hopefully in the next 6 months, that will be able to solve these for merchants, which will take away a lot of, I would say, custom code that has its own technical debt, which would be, a bit more of has been a harder conversation in the past. So, in answer to your question, I think, some of the exciting parts are the rollout of Shopify Markets, the rollout of different functionality around that. I also am excited about recent content offerings. We're no longer as integrators having to be it doesn't really fit into the idea of blog, page, article, product or variant. We have to think about this content as something so different, with the ability to have much more flexible approaches to content. We're able to solve for more nuanced needs and be able to provide more immersive experiences for brands and have a lot at stake.
And just a sub question on that one as well. So at the Unite event last year, Shopify kind of introduced the concept of a more, I guess, their own kind of content CMS solution that, allows for different content models and things like that. And there's been some talk around that, but I haven't seen too much since that event. Have you kind of played around with that? Do you have any views on kind of what role that will play in different stacks?
Yeah, totally. So we are leveraging that the new idea of content in a number of our active clients right now. So it's been released and it's first party, this idea of moving content not just away from I'd say extending Shopify's models with metadata, but having the idea of rich content types that have their own data types within those content types has been something that we've been empowered to use right now. We're using them for decorating products with a whole range of different rich, approaches to swatching, or using it to be able to provide rich immersive storytelling within a blog or a page that doesn't rely on third-party embedded applications to a greater degree, and just feels more immersive and more first-party to our clients and brands. So Shopify, we all, at Shopify Unite, it was an awesome presentation. We were like, oh, wow. Like it took a lot of us, the richness of it. Yeah, argue like took a lot of Plus merchants for surprise, but it's delivering and it's promising. And I say that it's arguably, competing well with, headless CMSs or more rich CMSs that we would have naturally brought into the stack. It also has enriched the offering of Online Store 2.0 as well, because one of the big selling points for headless is, we've got a complex business model. We've got an interplay between rich storytelling and merchandising. We don't want to be limited by a monolithic approach. So let's go with flexible for now. I would say for a lot of merchants, it's, this idea of content and it changing and shifting has changed the landscape of that, fabric of merchandising and content, and brought it more first party in a flexible way into the Online Store 2.0 channel.
One of the big announcements recently, which certainly got my interest, is the new checkout solution. And I know that having spoken to other colleagues of yours, that there's a lot of discussions you've been having about what's the migration path, how complex it is, what are the pros and cons, because obviously any change that hits the bit of the site that takes the money creates nervousness amongst merchants. Can you just talk us through what are the pros and cons do you see of the new checkout solution? What's different and what are the benefits? And then, I guess some of the considerations around migration, like how complex is a migration likely to be?
Yeah, totally. So one of the biggest, how should we approach this? So maybe just to give a little bit of a fabric of like what the change is. So for Plus merchants, if you wanted to customize the checkout, and before, you essentially could do it in two different ways. You can access the template that handles the liquid template, which is the code that shows the checkout, and you're able to edit it in a variety of different ways. Some of them more hacky to get things done, some of them less hacky. It's really up to the implementer to handle the risk of what that change is, and have to go through a proper QA cycle. But the landscape is large; you could do a lot. And then if you wanted to edit things that happen on the back end, you could do it through checkout scripts, which were written in Ruby. They had a pretty simple API, and you could do some things, but you couldn't, I would argue they could do a lot. You had to really understand the limitations, and so that you could have those conversations early on with the design team, product owner, what have you. What was one of the main negative points for the checkout liquid was that, it introduced a lot of, I'd say risk for a mission critical part for having SIs that could, easily introduce a bug, I would say, and it also made the upgrade path for Shopify to roll out features onto checkout kind of hard, because it's really hard to like merge in custom changes with like new features within checkout that Shopify wants to roll out. So every so often SIs would have to go through this kind of migration path of adopting a new checkout release, and it took time, and often those releases can take months, depending on what else needs to be married in with the other priorities of the brand. So what we have today in a version 2 checkout is a whole bunch of hookable areas that custom code can be run within different parts of a checkout. It can be in different parts of each of the different stages of the checkout. And then it can update the front end, the look and feel of it. And it can also, through Shopify, those are called checkout extensions, and through Shopify functions, you can run logic in a contained server-side environment. What you get is a greater ability to hook into different data. You can do things like run server-to-server requests, run external requests within those functions, which you could never do within checkout scripts before. And you also can have self-contained metadata so that you can, have state within your functions, and it's getting a little detailed, but it provides a greater richness for an SI to be able to achieve the needs of the business. What goes alongside that is that because it's kind of contained. An S-site doesn't have that flexibility that you had with the V1 checkout. So there are more conversations right now as the roadmap matures for certain things that, you can't do right now, but it's coming, or things that we need to think about in a slightly different way. So that's kind of like one thing. It's like there's an element of flexibility that has been rolled back, but that's part of a more progressive, imagine, roadmap that's going to be coming in the future, and that's going through developer previews right now with the cart transform API, for example. The other part of it is I would say from technical best practices, it really does provide us with a greater degree to manage all of this code within version control, within Git, be able to test it in a better way, release it in a better way. So it does provide a greater backbone, particularly for large clients, large merchants that have a lot of risk. In terms of a migration path, we've been going through a journey. So, with active accounts right now, we are looking at all of the functions, all of the scripts that were part of V1, and all of the custom presentational updates that were part of, that checkout.liquid file that we've been using, and thinking about ways that we would transform and release that into the new version. We've also been building on a starter kit for checkout for functions and checkout extensions, with a bunch of kind of starting points for things like bundling or gift with purchase or free shipping discounts, so that we have a good starting point for any merchant that needs to roll over and migrate. And so it's a progressive path. I think we're in a really good place for it. It's not without its homework and without its setup and its familiarity, but we have time to do it. If you're a merchant and you haven't had a conversation with your SI about this migration, I would encourage you to be able to have those conversations and get ahead of it sooner than later. And so, since there are some nuances with it and a bit of implementation time to be able to migrate.
Cool, excellent. Yeah, that's really helpful. It's also some good extra learning for me, because it's not something that I've not been involved in the migration yet. So thank you. I've got one more question. It's around B2B. I'm quite interested, because a lot of the business I work with are SMEs. They're not like huge, complex, like B2B companies like construction, manufacturing. But a lot of the SMEs I've worked with end up where actually 60+% of their commerce revenue is through the trade accounts, but they don't really have any dedicated B2B e-commerce. It's very basic, like online portal. And I've always considered Shopify to be quite basic for B2B, but they definitely seem to have pushed a bit more functionality. I'm just intrigued to where you think, what sort of model it suits, because I've always seen it as somebody who's got simple trade accounts and wants to do online selling, but the B2B solution's not that differentiated from their B2C, and then it would work well, versus where people have more advanced capabilities like complex account structures, complex quotation management, which would suit other platforms. Is that a fair assessment, or do you think Shopify is actually going to get a lot stronger in B2B?
Shopify has already given us this kind of guiding light that says we're iterating on B2B, and we understand the needs and we understand the shortcomings of our previous portal. So you're completely right. Like, I've been working with Shopify for, at this point, the better part of a decade. And for so much of that time, B2B offerings, having that conversation, you quickly run up against limitations of that previous B2B offering. It was a portal. It was a simple way of buying, streamlined for efficiency, without a lot of strong features that we could do as implementers. The idea of doing custom pricing models per customer, or adding in a product customizer experience. Say you're a company that wants people on the road to be able to sell a custom shirt or a custom musical instrument. You couldn't do that so easily with the B2B portal. But here, we're seeing a cleaner marriage between your consumer-facing experience and your B2B experience, and richness in modeling in the back end. So, we've got price lists now, so you can you can think about your products and you can separate the price of your products in a greater way so you can meet the needs of negotiated pricing contracts. And you've also got the idea of organizations coming in as a first-party model that sits with customers. So you don't have to handle like grouping of customers as you would with an organization to be its own kind of custom thing that you're doing with the APIs. You can actually handle that and build upon, first-party idea of this within Shopify. As an example, we worked with companies that we've had to think about like, okay, well, we've got negotiated contracts with organizations. An organization has multiple customers. We need to think about groups of customers with all of this richness of functionality at this kind of group level. We've had to handle this all through those APIs, through a custom app, etc. And we're kind of seeing a landscape where we're not going to have to handle so much complexity down the line.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm going to keep my eye on it because I've always long seen at the SaaS battles that BigCommerce has been significantly ahead, but it definitely feels like some of those gaps are getting filled or narrowed at the moment. Interesting. Max, thanks so much for coming along. Really enjoyed it. If anyone listening, I want to discuss a project or wants to like probe a bit further on any of the technical considerations we've gone through, how do they reach out?
Reach out. Feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to max@halfhelix.com, or if you want to just reach out to the team in general, there's always, team@halfhelix.com, or just go to our website, halfhelix.com, which has more targeted kind of communication routes. But, just to summarize, I'm always here at max@halfhelix.com. Reach out to me by email or reach out to me by LinkedIn. Max Roll.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you enjoyed it as well. Keep your ear open for the next episode. And don't forget to give us that rating wherever you're listening or watching. It really does help raise the visibility of the podcast. And Max, I wish you a very, very enjoyable flight, as much as it can be for 21 hours. And I hope you have a fantastic time back in Oz.
Appreciate it. And thank you for having me on.
For more information on this topic, head over to replatform.fm for our audio podcasts. To discuss a project, or if you'd like to chat about any of the topics covered in this episode in more detail, please reach out to myself, James Gurd, or my co-host Paul Rogers via LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks again for listening, and keep your ears peeled for the next episode.